Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Akanksha Gupta, and along with Rabia and Seidi, we are part of the team TensorMotif. We worked along with our mentor Moein on dynamical similarity in multitasking RNNs to identify shared motifs across task periods. Recurrent neural networks, or RNN, need little introduction as they have been part of neuroscience and AI research since a long time now. But one point that I would like to emphasize here is that this class of neural networks is specifically designed to handle sequential data, that is, to deal with inputs or outputs of variable length. RNNs are also particularly useful as they share similarities with the human brain. Another concept that is crucial to our work is that of a dynamical motif, which refer to the dynamic components such as fixed point attractors, rotations, or decision boundaries within a dynamical system. In context of RNN, particularly in our work, we are referring to the internal states, that is, the neurons of the RNN. Recent research by Driscoll et al. Sought to understand how neural systems implement dynamical motifs in a flexible way, allowing for their recombinations for behaviorally relevant computations. Particularly, they also examined how these dynamical motifs are recombined and reused across different tasks. So, with that, we try to understand, do these shared motifs perform computations that extend beyond geometric structures? We saw that in the work of Driscoll et al., they showed that the geometries of the fixed points are shared across different tasks, but we also thought that it would be crucial to understand the surrounding dynamics. So in this work, we used the train net from Driscoll et al., which had 15 different tasks across 4 task periods, which Sadie is now going to explain further.
Okay, so hello, I'm Seidi. So here I will show some examples of the tasks. This should be the task output from the RNN. So we have here 4 phases: fixation, stimulus, memory, and response. In this task, specifically memory pro, it starts at the center. So there's many targets possible. It is not yet shown to the RNN. During the stimulus phase, then it is shown, but the RNN is not yet doing anything. Then the target disappears, and the RNN has to memorize that position. And as soon as go queue appears, the net has to go to that target. Okay, so as another example, here we have memory anti. It shows the same phases. The only difference here is that at the response phase, the net goes in the opposite direction of the target that appeared during the stimulus phase. And finally, another example, this is delay anti. So the main difference here is that there is no memory phase. And the stimulus is present even during response. And since it's an anti, during the go queue, the net has to respond going to the opposite direction. So we have 15 tasks that are composed like that. They have some difference in phase structure. And in the paper, Driscoll et al. Characterized those solutions of the output as trajectories in the internal states. So here we have a PCA, dimensionality reduced internal states of the RNA, and the white trajectory with red contour here is the a trial trajectory during that a given trial. So during fixation, this is memory pro again. So we see in fixation, it stays at the center of a cloud of points of space. During stimulus, it goes to the direction that is respective to the given stimulus. So you can see it's color coded here. Depending on the stimulus that appears, the net goes to that trajectory. In memory phase, it stays there in what they call a ring. So this is a ring structure, and we could say it's a ring attractor in the internal dynamics. So when a go queue appears, this whole ring rotates, and this rotation here, so this trajectory seen here, is how the RNN implements this reaching. And here is just to show that we were also able to replicate those trajectories from the RNN. But our main method here is a dynamical similarity analysis, and which means to characterize dynamics inside those RNNs. And it works like this. So it basically has 3 steps. We start with systems. We get snapshots from the system evolving time. There is the Havoc, which we'll explain soon. It basically embeds the system in a high dimensional space where it's linearizable. And through dynamic mode decomposition, we are able to characterize this A matrix. This A matrix, what it does is evolves a point in time. So we can see it's a dynamic equation of internal states. And if we keep applying this A to those points, we actually see the system evolving in time. So we do that for 2 different systems. We get A, X, A, Y, and we compare them according to what they call a modified Procust analysis, which I will also explain briefly. So Havoc looks like this. So we have a system evolving in time. We characterize the systems in snapshots. So each snapshots become here a column of this matrix. This is a Hankel matrix, but we can just think of a delay embedding matrix. Each column is a snapshot. You can see a snapshot starts at time t1 and goes until tq here. And we have as many snapshots that goes from t1 until tp minus 1. So each column is snapshots. And then we also create an 8' matrix, which is just this matrix, but evolved 1 time step to the future. So it starts in T2 and goes until TP. And our main problem here is to solve A such that H' equals A applied to 8. So basically A is the transition matrix that when applied to 8 transforms it into H'. Just to get an intuition, we could invert this 8 matrix and isolate A. Not always possible because this matrix may be very big, so we'll not go in detail here, but there is a whole algorithm that does that if it's not easily invertible. But the intuition here is that we have the traditional geometrical view where we find the latent trajectories in the internal states of the RNN, shown here as the black traces. But in this case, this whole pipeline in the essay is able to characterize the vector field of dynamics that creates this flow of internal states. And it's characterized by the A matrix, the transition matrix. Just a summary, here's how we use it in our data. Here's the inputs of Memory Pro. So we get, for example, the memory inputs. It gets into the RNN infers, and from that, we select the internal states during that phase. From that internal states, we create the delay embedding or the Hankel matrix, and we apply DMG to find the AX matrix of these phase dynamics. We could think of it as maybe a ring attractor, as we've seen before. And then we could take another phase. Here's memory anti-response, go through the same pipeline, and we get AY. And this should show something like a dynamics of this ring rotation. So again, if we take the response periods of both tasks, in this case, we may also find a kind of ring rotation here and also a ring rotation here since we are in the response period. And finally, DSA calculates the discrepancy metric between AX and AY. And this is the Procust analysis, basically the distance between AX and a finely transformed AY. We can think of it as a translation, rotation, scaling. So if we get the examples before, here's the ring attractor, the ring rotation. Those are different dynamics. We should probably see a high DSA score, which means more discrepancy. But if the dynamics are more similar, we should get a lower DSA score, which means less discrepancy. And now Rabia will tell about the results.
Hi everyone, I'm Rabia. So this slide shows the results of our pairwise dynamical similarity analysis. We conducted DSA between all task periods. Each task period corresponds to a specific dynamical motif that was identified in the previous paper. So the goal here was to assess whether internal states across these task periods showed differences based on their DSA scores alone. So to do this, we compared all task periods pairwise and organize them visually using Ward's method. This is a hierarchical clustering algorithm. It merges clusters to minimize the increase in total within cluster variance. So the heat map on the slide, the x-axis and y-axis are labeled with the task periods of each of the 15 tasks in the multitasking RNN. Each cell in the matrix represents a DSA comparison between two given task periods. The color intensity reflects the degree of similarity, with lower values in dark purple corresponding to similar dynamics and higher values in bright yellow that correspond to increasingly different dynamics. So the color bars on the top and on the left of the heat map categorize all of these task periods by their assigned dynamical motif. This allows us to visually group the comparisons by motif identity. We found that for 7 out of the 8 motifs, task periods had similar DSA scores of close to 0, meaning that their internal states were largely similar according to this method. The one exception was the response period of tasks associated with the delay response motif, which showed a higher DSA score of about 0.2. So this suggests that DSA alone was not sufficient to distinguish all the dynamical motifs that were identified in the previous work. Those motifs were originally uncovered using principal component analysis, and with this analysis, we wanted to see whether DSA could capture similar structure without relying on PCA or interpolation as used in the original study. For most motifs, it did not, except in the case of the delay response motif, which is associated with a rotation into a different task subspace, as Seidi showed previously. This highlights that while DSA can reveal some differences in internal state dynamics, it does not in of itself fully distinguish between the motif structures identified, with the exception of delay response. So is this expected behavior? The original line of thought that inspired this project was asking if the dynamics around these motifs tell a different story than the geometry of their fixed points. To an extent, not having a very different DSA score makes sense, as the original paper positioned the geometry of the motifs as the fundamental drivers of the computation in the RNN. So if the geometric motifs are sufficient to tell the full story, the surrounding dynamics should not encode anything meaningful. If this is the case, we can expect some hard limits to what DSA is able to distinguish in this particular RNN and what we can expect it to be most sensitive to here. So our preliminary results suggest that it can track rotational dynamics as attractors evolve into different output potent subspaces. However, we still have a lot more work to do before we can say this conclusively. Primarily, our next steps involve optimizing the parameters of the algorithm and testing different kinds of dynamic mode decomposition, which is a component of the algorithm, to fully exploit DSA's capabilities. We also want to run more statistical validation tests on our clusters for both the high and low DSA scores, and we want to understand their behavior better in the context of their motifs. So to further investigate that DSA is capturing rotational dynamics moving forward, we will apply DSA to richer behavioral tasks featuring more intricate state space transitions. We are also very interested in applying this algorithm to biological neural data, where there's a large body of work describing neural dynamics rotating into output potent subspaces or otherwise moving into a null space. So this is something we would be very interested in exploring after we understand our analysis in artificial neural systems more thoroughly. But we understand that the noise and complexity from biological data present additional challenges. Thank you so much for listening, and you can find us on our socials listed here.